Today we're going to be talking about the educational foundations. First, we're going to discuss a teacher's role in the education system. So I decided to make a list of all the roles that I felt a teacher should take on or should at least attend to. Strong test scores versus strong character, creating divergent thinkers, protected versus prepared childhood, encouraging collaboration and developing civic leaders for our economy and our world, and creating confident students because confident students are confident learners. They need to make their students' voices heard, they need to advocate for them, and they need to just help them in this test-happy world that we live in as Spring States. While it's important to educate and enrich students in both standards and in life, I believe the true purpose of education is to build and instill character within your students. Spring states that if we send children to school and send children to college, then children will get a good job and they'll be successful. But is the only way children will be successful just by going to college and getting a good job? That's what society tends to think today. And this is where protected versus prepared childhood comes into play. As a teacher, it's your job to protect your students' childhood. You need to allow them freedom. You need to allow them to explore, learn new things. You need to engage them in your learning. To do this, I don't mean having them sit there and you lecturing them for hours on end about content. Students will be bored. You need to allow students to do, hands-on thinking, manipulate items to learn. Sir Ken Robinson discusses divergent thinkers. He did a test where kindergartners scored 98% on a test about divergent thinking. As the older the students got, the lower they scored. So divergent thinkers are people who aren't afraid to be creative. They think outside the box. They realize that there is more than one answer to a problem. And as students continue to grow and get older, this protected versus prepared childhood theory comes into play. Teachers hinder the students' ability to be creative, and they prepare them for what we expect is success in life, which is college and a job. Moving on to collaboration and development of civic leaders. Students need to collaborate with each other. Sir Ken again discusses in his TED Talk video that in schools, people see copying, for example, as not allowed. But is copying really a bad thing? Yes, there are some assignments that you should do that are independent, but copying is a form of collaboration, and we want to build collaborative people into our society. It's critical to build strong classroom community centered around collaboration, acceptance of differences and ideas, and create active citizens, according to Marie 2009. Strong character through respect, responsibility, and self-discipline will prepare students for their future while allowing them freedom and creativity to express their own ideas and to hear out others' ideas. And so I feel this is more important than just focusing on the standards, teaching to the test, even though we do live in this test-happy world. If students learn this way, they'll perform better on tests. Moving on, we're going to talk about that test-happy world during assessment and instruction. So there are 5 different approaches and types to instruction. There is direct, indirect, interactive, independent, and experimental. So direct instruction is done by a teacher with little to no participation from their students. Usually it's new information, and only about 5% of the information is actually retained by students. Indirect would be student-centered. This is one of my favorites personally. It's usually done at the conclusion of a lesson. I'm a huge advocate for this because this is the students creating a time for themselves to learn. They're teaching themselves, they're gathering all the information that they have learned, and they're teaching others, but also themselves. There's also interactive learning, again, which I really enjoy. This is collaborative and student-centered. So we just talked about how collaboration is one of the keys to success. It's peer-led. Independent instruction is again student-centered, and it assists in decision-making. Students have little to no interaction with their teacher, and they're free to explore, be creative, and learn on their own through discovery. Lastly, there's experimental instruction. This is again student-centered, and students are actively engaged. They're encouraged in participation, and students teach one another and learn through doing. I love this because it relates to one of my favorite theories, the project approach, which we'll talk about later. It has a very high retention rate because students learn better through doing. When teaching, students will retain information better if you're personable. You want to teach relevant content, and you don't want to teach to the test, even though, like I said, that's what we are most concerned about, is getting those high test scores, focusing on the standards. We focus on that Common Core curriculum for about 43 of the 50 states, Virginia having Virginia SOLs and their own standards. Now, the Common Core states that they don't tell you how to teach, but what to teach. That being said, if you can still teach to the standards, but in a fun way, your students will retain the information, they'll be engaged in the lesson, they'll have active participation, and they'll have fun learning about new information. But do these standards equal success? Is a student who knows everything there is to know about geometry and algebra and science really going to be way more successful than someone who enjoys reading a book or doing a science experiment? So there's the authors of Teach Like a Pirate and Ditch That Textbook are known as Dave Burgess and Matt Miller. They discuss how being personable with your students during instruction and making real-world connections to relevant topics will assist students in grasping concepts. It'll make learning easier for them, and they'll make those connections which they will then apply to assessments. So instruction through discussion, through doing, that's what helps students retain information. Content is consumed easily and it's remembered because it's relatable. So this is intended to create equality of education. The standards are intended to create quality of education and uniformity across the country, but there's no clear evidence supporting that raising standards will result in increased student learning, and there's no correlation between these standards and high test scores. A quote I want to share with you is, educational standards help teachers ensure their students have the skills and knowledge they need to be successful by providing clear goals for student learning. This is what Spring states in his textbook that we read for our class. While the intent of Common Core standards is to improve student learning and create consistency among all states, again, that's the equality of education, these expectations lack resources for minoritized students as well as other subgroups. So I'm talking about students of color, English language learners, and those failing to close the achievement gap which is desired. Now we're going to talk about this transmission of knowledge. Back to what I was talking about the project approach. I want to talk about John Dewey and William Kilpatrick, who I learned about in one of my previous courses. So Webster's definition of knowledge first is facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education. So just focus on that for a second, through experience. I think education should be transmitted through experience. So John Dewey and William Kilpatrick, as I was saying, are founders of the project approach, which I personally believe is one of the most effective ways of learning through doing. Dr. Ben Mardell of Harvard University explained that kids learn best through all of their senses. So not just listening, not just seeing. There are all different types of learners: tactile, auditory, visual. So if you focus on your senses, students should have manipulatives to assist their brain in development, and the more parts of your brain you use, the more likely you're to retain information. If you're only listening, such as a lecture, like I'm doing now, you're only activating one part of your brain. But if you're manipulating an item, you're, say, drawing a picture of it, using Unifix cubes to help you count, discussing features, performing an experiment, then you're more likely to retain that information. Sir Ken Robinson explains that in today's societies, students are frequently anesthetized in class to get them to calm down and to pay attention. But the reason they have to do this is that students are bored. They need to be woken up to learn. They need to use their creativity and tactile learning to strengthen their divergent thinking skills that we talked about previously. These are skills that assist you, like I said, to think outside the box. But educators frequently negate these skills to their students, preventing them from exploring their endless learning possibilities. Similar to standardized testing, our society is shutting down these creative ideas to focus on a social norm. Society frowns upon collaboration, which is a key aspect to learning. So we need to continue to make those personal connections for all students, and we need to focus on their culture. We need to relate. There's a contribution approach which focuses on cultural heroes, holidays, and cultural elements. This helps engage your multicultural students. There's an additive approach which focuses on the culture and ethnic content from the view of historians. There's a transformation approach that allows students to develop their own opinions based on cultural facts. And there's a social action approach which allows students to take their new views and new material learned about culture and apply their own opinions, their own thoughts and ideas to this. This is how we can close that achievement gap that we talked about previously and engage not just one group of students, but all groups of students. Next, we're going to talk about the educational trends. So several educational trends that are throughout United States history. We have Brown versus the Board of Education, Title IX, the Individuals with Disabilities for Education Act, poverty, Title I schools, and the No Child Left Behind Act, the ability groups, and school reform. So 65 years ago, the trial of Brown versus the Board of Education set the foundation for racial equality in schools. Followed by that was Title IX, which declared equality for women in schooling, and IDEA, the Disabilities Act, setting the stage for equality among individuals with disabilities. But the trend for equality has rung true for decades to promote education, yet despite these efforts, we have not reached true equality. The Title I program uses federal funding for schools with large populations for low-income families for aides to assist in meeting students' educational goals, according to Weckstein. The majority of the population in a Title I school is African American or Latino, averaging around 75%, while only 5% of that population is Caucasian. Schools do redistricting and rezoning, and these are forced attempts to achieve diversity through race. People are picked up on that, whether the government likes to think that or not. Students require free or reduced lunch, have lower parent income, geographic location, academic ability, parent education, housing situation, etc. The system wants to bring children together through race without acknowledging that this is the commonality. The No Child Left Behind Act holds schools accountable for school performance and is assessed through standardized testing to prevent discrimination of race, culture, and gender. Students are placed into ability groups and separated based on academic performance and family income. Now tell me this, just because a family lives in poverty, does that mean that their child is not as academically gifted as another student who may live in a mansion? No. Well, this is known as the sorting machine model. And teachers like to think that students don't pick up on this, but a student knows if they are placed in a high or a low ability group. According to Ruby Payne, schools operate on middle-class norms, and to move out of poverty in a lower ability group, students must give up these relationships for achievement. But how do they do this in a low academic placement? These groups are a form of social exclusion based on outside sources, according to Maihee. These children must be helped, and teachers should be their advocates, not their belittlers, which leads us into school reform. With school reform and transformation, we can focus on how children can escape from poverty. School districting and zoning, Title I, No Child Left Behind, various goals in the education system, equity, and school choice. So referring back to the districting and poverty we discussed, children are frequently placed in schools based on their socioeconomic status, which limits their education. Again, per Ruby Payne, poverty is relative. Spring writes in our textbook of lower quality teachers being placed in lower quality school districts based upon performance. These veteran teachers want to move to neighborhoods that are filled with students who go to the higher education schools with better amenities. This doesn't give students in poverty the chance to grow and learn. Payne states, as educators, we must teach students and provide support, as opposed to scolding students for not knowing. According to Murphy, the United States was once one of the top education programs in the world, but it has continuously declined. The standardized assessments are frequently mentioned, provide clear data as to where the students are both failing and succeeding. But the No Child Left Behind Act holds teachers accountable for the successes and failures of their students. School reform has goals to prepare students for jobs, for active civic duty, for participation, and to lead a full life, according to Bill Honing of Building Better Schools. If a child in poverty thrives better off of education, how do they receive one? School choice provides the opportunity for these students to have equality and equity of education. School choice was a strategy created in the 1980s to help motivate different school systems to be better, to have better learning environments, to have better teachers, better grades, and to just be successful. This was a motivational tactic, according to Carrasco. Parents were given the opportunity to choose where their child went to school based on multiple factors, including but not limited to high-quality instruction, family income, social networks, demographics, rationalities, and gender bias, according to Amturk and Longfield. So now we're going to talk a little bit about these relationships after school reform and relationships in the school, economy, community, and their function in society. So how the school can help the government, how the school can help the economy, how the government can help schools. So first, government helps school, school helps economy, and then it's just a continuous cycle. That's done through that school choice we were talking about. There's government funding, there's inequitable tax funding, civic duty, and again, back to that protected versus prepared childhood. So as the government helps schools, schools help the economy, but it all begins with that school choice we talked about. Spring writes that in regards to public and private schooling, school vouchers, charter schools, home schools, school online, and much more, school choice provides families with the ability to choose where they get their education from. It can be based on failing schools, it can be based on choosing a school in a different district, it can be based on safety of a school. Failing schools is talking about how schools don't do as well on test performance. And for some families, they may not be able to afford these programs, such as a private institution or a charter school. And these government vouchers are available to cover the cost of tuition, not only throughout that school, but as far as in the future for college, as well as any academic tool they may need. This could be computer, a tablet, if they need various things for physical therapy, maybe if they have a disability. But based upon the school district, inequitable tax funding is often received, causing varying school environments. The government funds schools, and teachers educate students for the economy, and the economic growth helps the government as the cycle continues. Upon discovery that government involvement is within most educational institutions, parents focus on their access to institution. This can be broken down into affordability versus availability, depending on the family income and taxpayer charitable funding that we talked about. And Spring writes that impoverished parents are often trapped in poor school systems because they cannot afford to move to school districts with better schools. This is still true today. We frequently see higher housing costs near better school systems. Again, like I talked about, keeping those veteran school teachers in the nicer school districts and those new teachers or maybe lower quality teachers in the lower quality areas, according to Merrifield. Presently, about 80% of children grade K through 12 attend their assigned public schools. Now, there's forced busing, redistribution of tax dollars, and there's reducing the role of local property taxes, which diminish the disparities in educational opportunities, according to Merrifield and Liu. But Spring also writes that today the emphasis on teachers is to educate workers for the global economy. So that's going back to that protected versus prepared childhood we talked about. They're getting rid of the protected childhood. They're getting rid of the creativity, the fun, the engagement, participation, and they're focusing on that prepared childhood for a future that is so far away that maybe nobody knows what to do with. So he focuses on the emphasis for the global economy. He says teachers are seen as the saviors of society, and they're meant to guide students to higher education in the labor market. So many institutions strive to stay within the cycle of these relationships to help society run smoothly. Yet they forget the true purpose of education is. As educators, again, like we said in the beginning, educators, it's your goal to create or to build character, to create active learners, to learn through exploration. As educators, we need to learn to incorporate these philosophies such as Dewey and Kilpatrick and theories in social and cultural aspects, multiculturalism in the classroom, teach relatable content, be personable with our students, and we need to find exciting ways to transmit this information into our students' heads and lives. The structure of education in modern society will become stronger than anyone has ever imagined if we can focus on protecting childhood and gradually preparing students for the future. And these are a couple of my sources that I used.